Shirley Adams to bring you Belt Bazaar, program number 6 of the series. I really love belts to give a finished look, add some polish, and definitely to coordinate the outfits. The belt I'm wearing coordinates the blouse and the suit because both fabrics are used here in the belt. So it kind of ties it all together and coordinates nicely. The same thing happens with the suit I wore last week, and the belt that I made to go with that combines the blouse and the suit again. So it all looks like a finished thing. It looks like a designer did it without looking homemade. So it can do some other things. It can either set the mood, making it casual or dressy. Anyone can wear them, really. A small waist can flaunt it, show it off in its entirety. But a large waist can just hint at some shapeliness by allowing a few inches to show where the jacket or the cardigan, whatever, opens. Well, here's how to make the belt that I'm wearing and the ones that I have around on the table from last week's suede scraps, or they don't have to be out of suede. They can certainly be out of any fabrics that you want to use. Or also, if belts are just not your thing, I showed you last week where you can do the same idea in a belt that you can in a bag. So transfer these ideas from one thing to another. And the way you do this then on the belts is start out by making a paper pattern, and I have one here already cut. This paper pattern is 6 inches longer than my waist, and you shape it as you like it. This one is just a straight belt. It does get, though, wider in the center. This is about 3 inches wide here at the center, and then it tapers out at the edges to about 2 inches in the back. So 6 inches wider or longer than your waist, and whatever shape and width you want it. Then we're going to need to have 2 layers cut in fleece. Now you can buy this polyester fleece by the yard. It comes in several brands, and you simply cut it the very same size as the pattern, 2 layers. And then you need 2 other layers of something different, Wonder Under or some fusible transfer web like this. And with this one, it's, notice, about 1/2 inch, 5/8 of an inch bigger all the way around than the fleece was, because we want that to wrap around the fleece to cover up the raw edges. So that's the starting point. Cut those out. Then we're going to take 1 layer of this Wonder Under, and I have it the business side down on a piece of fabric. That's the fusible side down. The web's down there, the transfer sheet's on top, of course, because you're going to put your iron on it. So this will just do with a sort of a medium iron or down to synthetics, and I'm just going to press this in place. Actually, I'm rubbing this. I'm ironing it in place, which is fine. And then after you do this, then cut out the fabric. Don't try to, in advance, cut out both the Wonder Under and the fabric and then get them to mesh. This is the easy way. So after you cut it out, or after you fuse it down, you simply cut it out all the way around. We do 1 layer of that in lining. We do another layer of that in the outside, the fashion fabric. So this one I've already fused down. This one I've cut off, and now I'm going to peel off that transfer sheet. And this is just a throwaway. But if you'd like, you can save this for a pattern to do on the next belt you do. So either way. Then these 2 layers of fleece that I cut, I want to do a little mark before I ever start so that I don't get confused later. I want to lift up 1 layer and just mark between them. And the reason I'm doing this is because even though they should be the same at both ends, in case my scissors went a little cattywampus here or there, I don't want to accidentally put them together the wrong way and they won't fit. I want to make sure I knew which end was together at the start so that it works out right at the end. Okay, then 1 of these layers, doesn't matter which because they're the very same, I'm going to put down on this fabric. And I want to see that red mark that I made, so I have it up on top. And I'm going to put a couple of pins in just to hold it in place. And then after it's pinned, I want to wrap the fabric all around the fleece. So I'll start at this end, and I'm going to pin this one down also. Just 1 little pin here. And then what I do to the ends, it sticks to itself if I push it. So I'm going to push it, not straight down, but notice how I pushed it in a little bit. I'll push this one because it popped up. I push it in just a little bit instead of straight across. And that's so when I fold it this way, the ends don't show out here where they shouldn't show. So just get myself a few pins here because I'm going to do a lot of pinning. So this is going to be pinned like this all the way around. And after you have enough pins to hold this in place, then it'll eventually be fused. Now I'm doing this a combination belt, combination of fabrics. The fashion fabric layer that I'm using here is floral. It's a woven print fabric, cotton. The lining layer that I'm using is a t-shirt knit actually. I sometimes combine with these things suedes and maybe nicer fabrics, dressier fabrics, but in this case it's going to be a casual belt to go with the summer dress. And what I'm doing, by the way, in case you wonder, what is that little thing she's working on? This is half size. It's so unwieldy and it takes a longer time than I care to make that whole big size belt. So this is a half size belt. I've simply cut it down in size. So the technique's the same. The belt you make will probably be a little larger because I don't know that there are any waists quite this small. Then, after we get this pinned all the way around, just a few pins to hold it, and notice also how I was putting these pins in. Not straight down, I am instead putting them in at a slant. They're going in this way on this side, and they're going that way on that side, and that's because now I'm ready to take the iron and just do a slight fuse baste here is what I'm really doing, all the way around. And after this is all slightly fused in place, then I'm going to be ready to give it a good hard fuse after I take the pins out of it. So, take the pins out and then really give it a hard fuse, and then it's ready to go to be made into this belt. Now, one additional little thing I'm going to need besides, and I would of course do the same thing to the lining layer as I did to the fashion fabric layer, because the two of them are going to be sandwiched together later, as you can see with this one, inside, outside. So I will later need the two layers, therefore do them both now, but I'm trying to hurry this along so I won't bother at this point. Okay, then we can give this a good hard fuse all over and really get it flat and turn it over and do the same thing. And this is where, if I had one of the suedes here, one of the synthetic suedes, this is where I'd put a press cloth over it before I then put the iron on it so that I won't ruin the surface texture of that suede. But on this cotton fabric, it simply doesn't matter if I put the iron directly on it. Okay, one additional little thing I'm going to need. If I would put this belt around my waist just as it is, this would sort of stick out and back. Now that's not too attractive. So what I've put there is a little anchor, because when I fasten this belt, I'm going to put the other end of the belt through here, and when I get it in the place where I want it on my waist, the Velcro pieces will stick down, but that little anchor keeps it all in shape so that it looks nice. So that's what I also want to build at this time while I'm here on the ironing board. So I have taken another little piece of Wonder Under, about 4 inches this way and about 1.5 inches wide, and I'm going to put that down on the fashion fabric layer and press, and then cut that out. And after I cut it out, I'll peel off that paper layer and enclose all the raw edges. And the way to enclose those is simply fold to the middle. So here I'm folding this, and because it's still warm, it sticks to itself. So I fold these to the center. I fold once more so that everything is completely encased except the ends. We don't worry about that at this point. And then press that, and then I'm ready to sit down at the machine and do the stitching. So this is really very quickly done, and it just makes some super belts. Now the first thing to do at the machine, that little anchor I did, I might as well go ahead and stitch that. So I'll stitch those two edges together, and when I do these belts, I have the same as I did for the Ultra Suede last week. I'm using a Teflon needle in here because it works a little bit better. It doesn't get caught as regular needles would. It just goes through easier if it's slippery as a stretch needle would be. So I'm going to stitch both sides of this, and then I'm ready to go on the belt. So there's the little anchor. Now what I want to do, I've already pinned to the lining layer one end of it. It doesn't matter which end, but one end of the lining layer. I want to pin the loop side, the soft side of some Velcro. I usually take that little Velcro strip, and this is not the kind that sticks on. You don't want to use that for this project because it'll skip stitches when you stitch then on the machine. This is the kind that does not have a sticky backing. But before I put it on, I'm going to round those corners a little bit just because they're nicer this way. So I'll round all 4 of the corners that way on the loop side, and I would do the same thing later on the hook side. So after I have that rounded, I'm pinning it down here to the lining layer of my belt, but not to the raw side back here. I don't want to see that. I want to see the finished side. So you pin it on the fabric side, and if you are going to put a label in, now's the time to just slip your label under the end of that and turn under the raw edge here of the other end, and I have that pinned in place. And also at this time, this is the time to pin the anchor, which I really didn't want to have on this belt. I had it pinned there. I'm going to pin that little anchor here too, and it's going to go underneath there on the fleece side, but it's also going to show, of course, on the top side. Now, I would ordinarily perhaps use clear thread that doesn't show if I had to have a combination of colors, or at least harmonizing thread, pink in this case, but I'm not going to here, just so that you can see after I finish what it looks like. Well, I'm simply going to stitch this little anchor down. If I pull out the pin, maybe it'll move easier, and I'll back stitch. I'll stitch forward again, so that anchor is secured right here. And then I'm going to move over to the Velcro and stitch that all the way around the outside. Now, these can be kind of big stitches. I have this set at about 3.5 so that it does a quicker job of it, but also because they don't need to be any smaller than this. Now, if your machine does not willingly stitch over pins, then be careful about this. You are going to occasionally hit a pin if you do anything like stitching over them. But I'm fairly certain, the way I have them placed and the fact that I use very fine pins, that it's not going to hit. So we stitch this all the way around. So far we've only taken a few minutes. This is really a pretty fast belt. And we'd cut all those threads off short every place and take all the pins out and get rid of the rest of these threads. Then, on the fashion fabric side of the belt, we need to have I didn't finish, pardon me. I'll go back here with my, realize I would stitch down the label. I won't bother at this point, but this is the time also when you'd stitch down your label. It's hooked here under the Velcro, but I didn't finish stitching it. Okay, then at the opposite side and the opposite end, I'm going to stitch the hook side of the Velcro. Now remember that little red mark I made at the beginning? Okay, here's the red mark that I have on both pieces. So I know that they're going to work out together if I put those red marks together. So at this end, at the other end, is where I want to stitch the hook end of the Velcro. So let's stitch that around. And then after that's stitched around, then we can sit back and pin a little bit. And please stitch yours very carefully so it looks wonderful. Okay, and I'll cut those threads off, and then we're ready to get those two ends together. So, okay, I'm going to do all this stitching from the top side, therefore it's a good idea to pin from the top side so everything goes together just right. And I'm going to put those pins not all the way through back and forth, but I will instead just try to keep it as flat as possible. And I want also, hopefully, to get a little roundness in this so that it goes around my waist well. Because I used the knit on the back side, I can probably force a little roundness into it, so it's not a bad fabric to use. Now that knit that I used is simply t-shirt fabric. And yes, I would even combine t-shirt fabric with ultra suede at times. It works well. And as I start to stitch this after I get through pinning it, I'm going to start stitching opposite this little anchor. That's where the starting spot is. And put a few more pins in here to hold it. Maybe put it down on the table. You can see why I did not do this in a full-size belt, because it would have taken longer than I cared to take. It's a good idea to work a little shape into these belts, because if you make them just straight around, they're not as comfortable to wear, but also they aren't quite as flattering. If they have a little bit of shape, like tapering off at the ends as this one does, it is more flattering to wear. This is just as easy on any kind of fabric. It doesn't matter if it's metallics or if it's, as I said, knits, wovens, anything you use. It's very easy to stitch on any of these and build a marvelous belt. Okay, now this is just the basic belt. I'll show you later a few variations you might try. Okay, it's all pinned together. I'm going to start stitching then, as I said, just opposite this anchor. So I'll start right here. I'll stitch all the way around and I'll stop here. I'm going to leave a little hole right here because the anchor has to slip in that. So if I start stitching right here, and I'm using the black thread again because this is a floral print, it might be a good idea instead to use some of that colorless thread to do this stitching. But okay, just stitches all the way around. And walking it along with my fingers to make sure things work out right. When I get to this corner, I'm going to put the needle down in the fabric and turn and come up the end. And turn again and come up this end. Now if you want to, what would probably be wise is to stop as you come to each pin and pull it out before you go beyond there. But I'm not doing that. I am simply stitching over them and hoping that my needle does not hit. Okay, here's where it might make a little bit of noise because it's going through several layers. And turn again and come up here, and I'm almost through with this. Okay, I backstitched and I can cut off my thread short, and now all I have left to do on this is to get that anchor attached. Well, what could present a problem on that little anchor is the fact that it's not too easy to stitch that in between layers and still get your foot under the machine. It's going to be here when I'm all finished, but what I'm going to do right now is put it across the top because I can turn it right side out later. And I'm going to put that stiff anchor's end, and that's why we stiffened it with the Wonder Under. I'm going to put that end right there in that little hole. And then when I do my stitching, I'm going to curve this up like this, and then my foot can go right under there without a problem. And it's only a few stitches that you need here, so it's not a long distance. It's a very short space that you're going to stitch. And I'll back stitch here and then go ahead and stitch forward to meet my original stitching and back stitch that. Cut all those threads off short, and then all I have to do to finish this is turn the anchor to the wrong side, and my little belt is completely finished. Now, if you've really been on a diet, that might fit, but it looks more like a bracelet than a belt. But anyway, this is the idea. This is a finished belt. It was very quick and easy to make, and you too can make it. What I'd like to show you, though, with this belt is some of the variations that you might do. Now, as I said, you can combine the knits and wovens. You need to, of course, think, is it compatible? Because if you are going to wash it, it better be compatible so that you can either wash it or dry clean it, whichever is appropriate. Very often, and especially if they're in darker colors, it's doubtful that you're ever going to do anything to it, such as cleaning it or washing it, so you don't have to worry about it in most cases. Pastels, summer outfits, then I would make it all washable so that it will work into your lifestyle more easily. Some of the variations that you might do on this would be, of course, using a different fabric here or there, or a combination of fabrics. But even if I do use Ultra Suede, remember I was saying last week that we use some raw edges. Here I would go ahead and cover all these edges because it works well that way. I'll just get this belt down a minute here again. One of the things I really like about these belts with the fused layers is the fact that, see how soft and squishy this is? But it doesn't look that way when it's on your waist. It looks very rigid, and it holds in place very nicely. And it's comfortable. It doesn't poke you in the ribs or hips, so that's what I like about the fleece inside, the fact that it is so soft. Now, some of the variations. Notice right here what the variations are. What I did was combine my blouse fabric with the suede of the suit, and I did it for a couple of reasons. I didn't have maybe enough of the scraps to go all the way around of the suede, so this pads it out a little bit. If you're using a very expensive fabric in some part, you can just use a little bit of it and not a great deal, and pad it out with then a less expensive fabric or whatever you have more fabric of. Also, the lining of this, it's something completely different than either of the fabrics that I used on the face of it. It's just something that harmonized well with it. In fact, it's some leftover suit lining from this suit is what's used there. Let's think of some of the other things you might do and the inspiration that you get from them. I'll pull a few of these over as I reach for them and show you. The idea from this came when I was boot shopping, and I saw some boots that were kind of crushed at the ankle. And I thought, now that looks like a good idea to transfer to a belt. And then I later transferred it, as I did or showed you on the suit I wore last week. I transferred that same idea to the waistline of this suit. And what that idea is simply cutting through the suede layer. I'll move this around a little bit and you can see that about every ½ inch I made a little slash there with a craft knife, just a short slash. And I did that before I did any fusing. This was just to the suede as it was originally. And I then wove, after I had all those little slashes made, I wove this cording through it, and that cording was just made out of the same suede, little knot tied on each end, the second end after I finished weaving it. But I wove that back and forth through everything, and I scrunched it up, gathered it up there on the cord as much as I wanted to so that it looked the way I wanted, and then tied the second knot. Then after I did all this, that's when I fused it to the fleece and so on. So what this meant is it wasn't the original size of that pattern. It was going to be a little bit bigger in the middle in order to make those pleats there. So here's one idea. You get an idea from whatever you see out there that you like, and you transfer those ideas in other ways. Here's one that I have. A few weeks back I showed you a quilted jacket that was made of this fabric, and this belt that I made to go with that quilted jacket is just a tracing of it, or at least it's a blown up tracing of it. There are little teeny flowers and they look just like this, and they're the very same colors as I have here. Now I've told you before, you don't have to be an artist to do these things. Just borrow your ideas from the fabric artist or from whomever. You can get a good idea. So I did these tracings on Wonder Under. I fused them to the back side of the same colors of suede that were in the fabric, and then after I had them fused on top of the belt, I stitched them down. Any of these extra embellishments that I put on like this, I would stitch down to the one layer as I have it fused here on the ironing board. This layer, when I had it all fused, this is when I would actually embellish it. I would not wait till the belt was completely finished and embellish later, because if you would do that, your stitches would show through to the wrong side also. And I kind of like the wrong side. Nobody's going to see it but me, but I kind of like the wrong side looking very nice. So, another little idea there. Here's one where I ran out of suede. Also, I only had a small amount of suede to put on one end of it, and then I had a whole lot of suede scraps to make stripes out of. Now obviously where I got those little scraps, or why I use these colors, is because they are the same colors that were used in this fabric. So again, I'm borrowing from that artist who did the fabric so that I could get the colors together that would go so well. So I did the other half of the belt out of fabric instead of out of suede because, as I said, I didn't have enough, but also because this will coordinate the outfit that it's worn in. Another idea here, just stripes going across. And with these stripes, they also were the very same colors that I found in a print fabric. Print fabrics are always a good source for any ideas. So this print fabric, I simply took the same colors in it, and as I did these stripes, I didn't actually fold those around when I was doing the original cover of it, like this. I didn't fold them around. I did the cover, and then I just had these stripes going off straight. I had them fused in place, and after I got them all fused, I took my scissors and just gave them a haircut along the edges to get rid of the excess that was sticking out beyond. Another belt that you might have seen a few months back in a magazine, this was an article that I had written, and what I have done on this is combine not only the synthetic suedes, but it also has a little scrap of real leather, animal leather, a little lizard here, so you can combine other things with it. Some other ideas that you might use in this: go for a walk along the beach, collect some shells, and see what you can do with the shells. Down here I think I have one that has a shell on it. Now this one isn't actually attached. This shell is an abalone shell. It has little holes punched in it. Nature punched those. I didn't do it. And with those little holes, I simply wove a silk cord through them back and forth, and it's the cord that's attached to the belt. Then I did a few more little shells around here to kind of copy that, to just repeat that. So nature might give you an idea. A belt that I have down here is The lining of the belt is what inspired this one, and because of that lining, the print of it, it had, oh, nice chrysanthemum sort of things on it. I thought, let's give that a little bit of glitter. And the way I did that was put some metallic thread in the machine, and I fused, first of all, the lining fabric to a little fleece to stiffen it. And then I just stitched back and forth along there with the metallic thread to follow the lines in the fabric, and afterwards stitched on some beads by hand. So it makes quite an effective belt, and yet it's a very simple thing. It is very low in cost, simply made from scraps. There are times, though, when I would go into a fabric store and buy belts or buy fabric specifically for these belts, very expensive fabric, but even if it's terrifically expensive, you use such a small amount, 1/8 of a yard is all you use in any of these of the fabric, that it actually doesn't add up to much. Well, I really have such fun designing these belts and making them that by now I possibly have 200. I hate to admit it, but I possibly do. So I warn you, they are addictive. They're a lot of fun to make, and you also can make them. Now, what are you going to do if you have that many belts? Well, of course you wear them whenever the outfit calls for it, but think about putting a big rack, those expandable racks with all the wood pegs, think about putting that on your sewing room wall maybe and hanging all the belts there. Well, you can do it. It doesn't take a special touch. Next time, however, we're going to talk about a special touch, the Midas touch, as we look into working with metallics in golds and silver to put a little glitter in your life. So come back and join us then.